Red Dust was a town that clung to survival, the way sand clung to boots unwanted, unavoidable and hard to shake. Wind carried grit through its narrow streets, and every building bore the scars of heat, time, and forgotten promises. Men came here to work cattle, lose money, or disappear. Few came for beauty. That was why the music felt wrong. Inside the Red Dust Saloon, laughter and crude talk faded as Samantha's fingers pressed down on the piano keys. The instrument itself was a tired thing, its wood cracked, its sound uneven. Yet, under her hands, it transformed. Notes flowed smooth and deliberate, carrying a depth that stopped glasses mid-air and hushed arguments before they could spark. Samantha sat straight-backed on the bench, her dark hair pinned neatly away from her face. She wore a modest dress, faded but clean, sleeves buttoned to her wrists, even in the heat. She never looked at the crowd. Her eyes stayed fixed on the keys, as if acknowledging the room might break the spell or expose her. Most patrons couldn't explain why they suddenly felt restless, or why the song pulled at something buried deep in their chests. They only knew it wasn't saloon music. It didn't belong to Red Dust. Neither did she. Troy Calder stood just inside the doorway, one hand still on the swinging door, dust clinging to his coat from the long ride in. He'd planned to stay long enough for a drink and a meal before heading back to his ranch. But the sound of the piano rooted him in place. He wasn't a man given to poetry or softness. His days were shaped by sun, cattle, and hard decisions. Still, something in that music reached past the calluses and straight into memory. It spoke of discipline, loss, and restraint, things learned, not guessed. He took a seat near the wall, his hat pulled low, eyes fixed on Samantha. She didn't acknowledge him, but she felt his presence. Samantha always knew when someone truly listened. Her hands trembled for just a breath before steadying. She finished the piece with a quiet, final note that seemed to linger long after her fingers lifted. For a moment, the saloon was silent. Then, the room exhaled. Chairs scraped. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loudly, embarrassed by the stillness. A few men offered half-hearted applause, unsure why they felt compelled to do so. Samantha stood, gave a brief nod toward the bar, and stepped away from the piano. Just like that, the magic ended. Troy drank slowly, his attention still on her as she moved behind the bar to collect a small payment. She kept her gaze lowered, shoulders tight, like someone expecting to be recognized or accused. When she disappeared up the narrow staircase, Troy finally spoke to the bartender. "She'll play like that every night?" he asked. The bartender shrugged. "Enough to keep folks quiet. She don't cause trouble, pays for her room. That's all I care about." But Troy knew better. Music like that came from a life far from Red Dust, a life Samantha was hiding from. And for reasons he didn't yet understand, he found himself wanting to hear the rest of her story. Samantha awoke before sunrise, as she always did. The saloon was quiet at that hour, the kind of quiet that let old memories slip through cracks in the mind. She dressed carefully, smoothing her sleeves, tying her hair back until not a strand dared fall loose. Control mattered. Control was safety. Downstairs, the piano sat in silence. She avoided looking at it. By late afternoon, Red Dust stirred awake again. Wagons creaked, boots struck wood, the smell of sweat and horse mixed with frying meat. Samantha helped the bartender wipe tables before retreating to her familiar corner when the sun dipped low. She told herself the rancher from the night before wouldn't return. He did. Troy Calder entered the saloon without ceremony, dust on his boots, posture relaxed but alert. He ordered one drink and took the same seat near the wall. He didn't stare this time. He simply waited. Samantha noticed anyway. When her fingers touched the keys, she chose safer songs, simple melodies, predictable rhythms. Still, Troy heard the discipline beneath them, the restraint, the way she held back like a horse trained not to bolt. Between sets, Troy approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. "You play like someone who learned in a place where silence mattered," he said. Her spine stiffened. "You should drink your whiskey while it's cold." He smiled faintly. Fair enough. But he didn't walk away. "I'm not here to pry," Troy added. "Just saying. You're not invisible." That was the wrong thing to say. Samantha met his gaze sharply. For a moment, fear flashed. "They're quick and controlled." "In this town," she said quietly, "that's a compliment." She returned to the piano before he could answer. Over the next several evenings, Troy became a constant. He never pushed, never asked her name at first. He listened the way a man listens to weather, carefully, patiently, aware that rushing only caused damage. Eventually, she spoke first. "Samantha," she said one night, as if the name were a burden she needed to set down. "Troy," he replied. "Good to finally know who I'm listening to." That word listening settled somewhere uncomfortable in her chest. Their conversations stayed shallow, but the silence between them grew easier. Samantha learned Troy ran a modest ranch west of town. He learned she'd arrived in Red Dust alone, with little more than a suitcase and the clothes she wore. He didn't ask why. One night, after a long set, Samantha stayed at the piano longer than usual. The saloon had emptied, leaving only lantern light and the creak of cooling wood. She played a piece she hadn't touched in years, soft, complicated, trembling at the edges. Troy didn't interrupt. When the final note faded, Samantha realized she was shaking. "That wasn't meant for an audience," she said, her voice low. "I won't tell anyone," Troy answered, "but I'll remember it." She laughed, once sharp and humorless. "That's worse." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Then I'll remember it," quietly. As he turned to leave, Samantha surprised herself by speaking again. "Why do you come back?" Troy paused. "Because that music sounds like someone trying not to break." He left before she could respond. Samantha sat alone with the piano, long after the saloon lights dimmed, realizing something dangerous had begun. Someone was hearing more than just music. The trouble with being heard, Samantha discovered, was that it made hiding harder. She tried to keep her distance after that night, sticking to shorter sets and familiar tunes, but the piano betrayed her. It always did. No matter how careful she was, emotion slipped through her fingers like water through cracks in stone. Troy noticed. He never mentioned it outright, but his eyes followed her hands more closely now, his posture still and attentive. He came earlier each evening, left later, and spoke less. It was as though he understood that words might fracture something still fragile. "Red Dust," began to whisper. "City player," one man muttered. "Too good for this place," said another. "Thinks she's hiding from someone." Samantha heard it all. She always did. One evening, a drunk slammed his glass on the piano top, mid-song laughing. Samantha froze, breath caught tight in her chest. Before she could react, Troy stood. "That's enough," he said calmly. The room went still. The drunk scoffed, but backed away. Samantha kept playing, though her hands shook until the last note fell apart. Later, when the saloon closed, she stayed seated, staring at the keys. "You didn't have to do that," she said without turning. Troy leaned against a nearby post. "Yes, I did." Silence. Stretched. "I didn't ask for a protector," Samantha added. "Good," Troy replied. "I'm not one." That made her turn. "Then what are you?" He thought for a moment. "Someone who knows what it's like to carry something heavy and pretend it isn't there." The honesty in his voice unraveled her restraint. Samantha stood abruptly and walked outside into the cool night air. Troy followed, stopping a few steps behind her. The moon cast long shadows across the dirt road, and for once, Red Dust felt exposed rather than hidden. "I used to play in concert halls," she said suddenly. "Real ones, with chandeliers and velvet seats." Troy didn't react. He didn't interrupt. "I trained since I was a child. Judges, critics, applause." Her voice wavered. "One mistake, one that wasn't even mine, and everything collapsed. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about spectacle." She pressed her arms tight against herself. "So I ran." Troy nodded slowly. Running keeps you alive sometimes, but it doesn't let you live, Samantha whispered that night. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding shaped not by romance, but by shared damage. In the weeks that followed, Samantha played more freely. Not louder, but truer. Troy began helping around town, fixing a fence here, lending a hand there, giving himself reasons to stay. Then the stranger arrived. He wore a clean coat and carried himself with confidence that didn't belong in Red Dust. When Samantha played, his eyes sharpened. He approached her after the set, his smile knowing. "You're wasted here," he said, "and you're not as forgotten as you think." Samantha felt the past claw its way back. That night, she didn't sleep. The man returned. The next evening, Samantha knew he would. Men like him didn't stumble into places like Red Dust by accident, and they didn't walk away once they found what they were looking for. He sat near the piano this time, watching her hands with professional interest rather than admiration. It made her skin crawl. She played anyway. Each note felt like a challenge, defiant, precise, unflinching. The saloon grew quiet again, but the silence felt sharper, edged with tension. When she finished, the man clapped slowly. "You still have it," he said. "Even on a piano like this." Troy stood before Samantha could respond. "You bothering the pianist?" The man looked him over, unimpressed. "I'm offering her an opportunity." Samantha felt the room closing in. "You should leave." Instead, he leaned closer. "They'd forgive you now." People forget quickly when talent reminds them why they cared. After he left, the whispers grew louder. The town that once ignored her now watched her too closely. Samantha's carefully built anonymity began to crack. That night, she and Troy stood outside the saloon again. The familiar silence, heavier than before. "He knows who I am," she said. "I figured," Troy replied. "Question is, what do you want to do?" She looked toward the horizon, where darkness swallowed the road. "I don't know if I'm brave enough to go back, or strong enough to stay." Troy removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Then don't decide alone." For the first time, Samantha allowed herself to lean into that offer, not physically, but emotionally. She played one final set that night, not for Red Dust, not for the past, but for herself. The music carried truth, and truth demanded a choice. Samantha did not sleep that night. The stranger's words echoed louder than the piano ever had. They'd forgive you now. Forgiveness was not what frightened hurt, was being seen again. Measured and judged by people who once decided her worth with a single headline. At dawn, she packed her small suitcase. The saloon was quiet as she descended the stairs, every step heavy with finality. The piano waited in the corner, keys dull in the morning light. Samantha touched it once, gently, the way one touches something loved, but left behind. Outside, Troy waited with his horse. "I thought you might be leaving," he said. "I am," she replied. "I just don't know where yet." He studied her face, then nodded. "Then ride with me for a while. You don't have to decide today." They rode out of Red Dust together, the town shrinking behind them. The land opened wide sky, stretching endless and honest. For the first time in years, Samantha felt the weight lift from her shoulders. That night, beneath the stars, she played on a small traveling keyboard Troy had brought from a neighbor's home. The music floated freely, unhidden, unafraid. Samantha smiled. She was no longer running. She was choosing, and somewhere between the fading notes and the open road, Samantha and Troy began a life shaped not by escape, but by truth, trust, and love. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.